Imagine being accused of a crime with no lawyer, no fair trial, only the cold hands of the torturer waiting in the shadows. What fate would await you? Cut to visuals of dark dungeons, rusted iron, flickering torchlight. The Judas cradle, a pyramid of wood or metal, was lowered onto its victims, slowly impaling them over hours. But here's the twist. Despite its gruesome reputation, evidence suggests it might not have been widely used in the Middle Ages at all. So why do we picture it in every dungeon? This device reveals how our modern imagination amplifies medieval brutality, turning rare horrors into symbols of an entire era. The real torture was often simpler: ropes, fire, and sheer human cruelty. In 15th century England, the Duke of Exeter introduced a device so feared it earned a nickname: the Duke of Exeter's daughter. Victims called it the rack, where bodies stretched until joints tore apart. But this wasn't mindless violence. It was calculated terror, approved by kings and bishops. Today we'll dissect how such tools became instruments of justice and why their legacy still haunts us. From the Spanish Inquisition to London's Tower, follow the twisted evolution of pain as policy. Preview the Iron Maiden's spikes glinting in torchlight, except it's all a lie. Historians confirm this iconic medieval torture device likely didn't exist until the 1800s. So why does it dominate our dungeons in theme parks? The answer uncovers how the 19th century reinvented the Middle Ages as a carnival of cruelty. We'll separate fact from fantasy, revealing the real devices that shattered bones and silenced dissent, tools far more brutal than Hollywood's inventions. I used to think medieval torture was about truth, until I read the trial records. Confessions under the rack meant nothing, because pain makes people say anything. That's what chilled me. These devices weren't truth finders, they were fear makers. Today we'll explore how rulers weaponized pain to control minds, not just bodies. From heretics' tongues torn out to wheels crushing limbs, see how suffering became spectacle, and why we still can't look away. Fact: the thumbscrew crushed fingers to pulp, yet rarely killed. That was the point. Unlike Hollywood's blood-soaked tales, real medieval torture prioritized prolonged suffering over quick death. This precision engineering of anguish, spikes that avoided vital organs, wheels that broke bones cleanly, reveals a sinister truth. Pain was a language, and every scream a lesson in obedience. Today, we decode that language through 8 devices that defined an era of sanctioned cruelty. Visualize this. A heretic's fork stabs your throat if you speak, your chest if you slump. No movement, no rest, just paralyzing pain until you confess. Now imagine enduring it for days. This simple tool, not flashy machines, typified medieval torture, silent, relentless, and brutally efficient. Today we'll expose how such devices turn the human body into a battleground for faith and power, using original illustrations and newly translated interrogation manuals. Problem: you're a medieval ruler with a rebel problem. Solution: tie them to a wheel, shatter their limbs with an iron bar, and leave them screaming for crows. Dark humor aside, this was real policy, terror as governance. From the Duke of Exeter's daughter to tongue terrors heated over coals, we'll explore how pain became performative politics. Warning: this video may ruin your next Renaissance fair. The purpose of torture is not to kill, wrote a 13th century inquisitor, but to make death a mercy. This chilling logic underpinned devices like the Judas cradle, slow impalement over hours, and the rack's deliberate joint-by-joint destruction. Today, we analyze 7 torture methods through their designers' own words, revealing how medieval power structures weaponized agony not for truth, but for precedent-setting terror that echoes even now. Imagine being strapped to the rack, feeling your joints pop one by one as the torturer slowly turns the wheel. This wasn't just pain, it was theater, designed to extract confessions through unbearable agony. But how many actually faced this fate? Historians reveal a shocking truth. Torture may have been far less common than we think. Dr. Hannah Skoda's research suggests these devices were often more myth than reality. So why does the rack loom so large in our medieval nightmares? The answer exposes the dark psychology of power and fear. Why did medieval torturers care more about the audience than the victim? Modern justice happens behind closed doors, but medieval punishment demanded spectators. Town squares became stages where authorities performed brutal lessons on obedience. The pillory wasn't just restraints, it was a spotlight. Victims stood pinned for hours as crowds jeered, their faces target practice for rotten food and stones. Dr. Hannah Skoda's work shows something unexpected. Actual torture was rarer than the myths suggest. Records from the Spanish Inquisition reveal only 2% of cases involved physical torture devices. Yet every village knew their horrifying details. Why? Fear traveled farther than agony ever could. Witnesses to public punishments became carriers of cautionary tales. The psychological impact was calculated. A 1497 Nuremberg account describes a thief left in stocks for 3 days straight. By the second afternoon, children played nearby as the man groaned. Normalization of suffering made the message clearer. Defy order, and this could be you. Spanish Inquisition logs note how officials timed executions to market days for maximum attendance. Crowds of 500 or more regularly gathered, some bringing picnics. But why go through the trouble? A 15th century French legal text spells it out. The people must see justice to believe in its power. Broken bodies were billboards advertising consequences. The Milanese aristocracy paid extra to have execution scaffolds built higher for better visibility. In Toulouse, officials moved the whipping post beside the cathedral so Sunday congregations would watch floggings after Mass. These spectacles weren't about fairness. They were about control through visceral fear. A 1423 London Chronicle records a pickpocket being branded before a crowd, only for 3 more thefts to occur during the event. The lesson wasn't lost on authorities. Deterrence required repetition. Humiliation alone couldn't curb desperation, so methods escalated. But some devices went beyond shame into outright body breaking. The wheel didn't just kill, it left victims twisting for days as a warning. Unlike quick executions, the breaking wheel prolonged suffering intentionally. Executioners used iron clubs to systematically shatter limbs, legs first, then arms. Some variations tied the victim to a wagon wheel. Others used vertical frames. The shattered limbs were then woven through the spokes, leaving the body contorted and exposed. German town records from the 1400s show these devices were often placed near city gates, the first sight visitors would see. In Mainz, officials positioned the wheel beside the main road, ensuring travelers couldn't miss the writhing remains. The message was clear. Violence would meet lawbreakers here. French legal codes specified the wheel for highwaymen, reinforcing its role as a deterrent for crimes threatening trade routes. Death rarely came quickly. Infections from compound fractures killed most victims over several days. A 1487 Nuremberg chronicle describes a murderer surviving 3 nights on the wheel before succumbing to gangrene. Birds often pecked at the living victims, adding another layer of torment. Authorities didn't intervene. Prolonged agony served their purpose. Yet the contradiction is stark. Swift executions existed, yet the wheel persisted for centuries. Why choose such a gruesome method? The answer lies in visibility. Broken bodies on display became geographic markers of authority. Strasbourg's archives note a corpse left on its wheel for 9 weeks in 1532, long after death, until townspeople complained about the smell. Even then, officials simply moved it farther from the market, not removing it entirely. This wasn't justice, it was performance. A 16th century Bologna case involved a thief whose shattered body was displayed despite his family's pleas for burial. The council refused, stating the spectacle had not yet served its full purpose. The wheel's effectiveness relied on the cumulative horror of seeing and smelling decomposition in progress. Victims became living, then dead, reminders of consequences. The wheel's legacy reveals how medieval justice weaponized anatomy. Shattering limbs created unmistakable symbols of power. Unlike hidden dungeon tortures, these displays required public engagement. Townspeople had to see, discuss, and remember. Other devices took a quieter approach, specializing in silencing dissent, literally. One device turned the human body into its own prison. The heretic's fork, a simple metal rod with spikes at both ends, required no elaborate contraptions. Pressed under the chin and against the sternum, it prevented the wearer from sleeping without impaling themselves. More importantly, it made speech painful. Inquisition manuals explicitly state its purpose. Let the fork silence the tongue while fatigue breaks the spirit. The tongue terror took this further. Shaped like pliers with serrated edges, it ripped out tongues of blasphemers mid-trial. Church edicts from 15th century Spain ordered its use for those who speak against God's servants. These weren't hidden tortures. They happened in courtrooms. A Toulouse record from 1432 describes magistrates using the terror before sentencing, ensuring the condemned couldn't protest their fate. Why prioritize silencing over swift execution? Control extended beyond the body to the very act of defiance. A severed tongue couldn't spread heresy, but a screaming heretic could. Venetian archives note 6 cases where accused witches had their tongues removed before burning, not to ease suffering but to prevent last-minute curses. The church feared words more than wounds. The fork's design reveals deeper psychological warfare. Victims couldn't lower their heads to rest, creating sleep deprivation within hours. Inquisitors noted confessions often came after 2 nights of enforced wakefulness. A 1491 Burgos case describes a suspect biting through his own tongue to escape the fork's torment, only to be fitted with another device preventing jaw movement. Neither tool drew blood dramatically, unlike the wheel or rack. Their power lay in denying fundamental needs: speech, rest, even the relief of unconsciousness. A Leipzig chronicle records a Lutheran pamphleteer kept fork-bound for 8 days until he recited Catholic prayers. What broke him wasn't pain, but the inability to protest. Authorities understood that silencing dissent required attacking the mechanisms of resistance itself. These weren't medieval inventions. The Romans used similar tongue clamps on rebellious slaves, but the Church perfected them as ideological tools. When the Spanish Inquisition adopted the fork in 1252, papal bulls specifically authorized its use for crimes of utterance. The body became collateral in a war over minds. Yet some torture myths persist despite shaky evidence. The evidence shows medieval torture served power more than justice. Contrary to popular myths about truth extraction, primary sources reveal its true purpose: maintaining what Dr. Hannah Skoda calls an economy of fear. The wheel, the fork, the stocks, all existed primarily as public spectacles. Toulouse's records prove officials scheduled punishments during festivals for maximum turnout. What other dark histories need re-examining? Comment myths you've heard about medieval life. The past's brutality offers sobering lessons, not about archaic cruelty, but about how authority reinforces itself through visceral demonstrations. Nuremberg's torture devices gathered dust more often than blood, yet their legend persisted. Control thrives on imagined horrors as much as real ones.